Hey guys, this is BHB, and today on the channel we have a new series for everyone, NBA Battlegrounds. Now basically, NBA Battlegrounds is a competition between two NBA players throughout NBA history, and the scoring for this competition will be divided into 5 categories: individual success, defense, offense, team success, and how much help or talent they've played with throughout their entire career. The twist is that I have each category worth a certain amount. To ensure that each category is measured correctly, I have put together a multiplier that you guys can see on the screen as of now. However, the help category is graded differently, as I believe that the amount of stars or superstars a player has played with throughout their career affects all categories. As a result, help has its own multiplier that affects the final score of all categories. If you guys don't understand, it's okay. You guys are basically going to be seeing how it works as the video goes on, and nevertheless, those are the rules, and let's just get right into it. So basically for everyone today, we have Chris Paul and John Stockton, 2 of the greatest point guards to ever play the game. And basically, Chris Paul, he is 6 foot 1 inches tall, 175 pounds, while John Stockton is 6 foot 1 inches and 170 pounds. So as you can see, these guys, they're pretty small even for their position, the point guard position, they're pretty small. So it's going to be really interesting to see how many insane numbers they're going to be able to put up throughout their career, even with this little, I guess, disadvantage that they were born with, you know, only being 6 foot 1 in the NBA. But yeah, so let's just see the first category, which is going to be individual success. So right off the bat, all defensive accolades are not included in this section because I'm going to keep that in the defensive category. So yeah, I'm not going to let the individual accolades spill into other categories. I'm just going to keep everything separate. So as you can see here, Chris Paul on the left, he's a 10-time All-Star, 4-time assist champion, 8-time All-NBA, 2006 Rookie of the Year, and 2006 All-Rookie. So those are his accolades. Pretty impressive if you ask me, and that's going up against John Stockton's 10-time All-Star resume, 9-time assist champion in the NBA, and 11-time All-NBA. Now, Chris Paul can definitely improve his own little accolade resume throughout his career. I did take that into account when grading this. So yeah, just getting right into this, I mean, both 10-time All-Stars. Of course, John Stockton's got the 11 All-NBA teams and the 9-time assist champion, but then at the same time, Chris Paul does hold his own. And not only that, but I also looked further into Chris Paul's stats as well as John Stockton's. But for Chris Paul, I found something very, very interesting, which I feel really gave him the edge over this category. So as you can see here, Chris Paul is number 1 in point guard offensive rating, number 1 in point guard offensive box plus minus, number 1 in point guard PER, number 1 in point guard win shares, number 1 in point guard box plus minus, number 1 in point guard playoff PER, and number 1 in point guard playoff win shares per 48 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, holy shit. Look at this. Look at those stats. And that's in NBA history. Number 1 point guard in all those stats. That's insane. All right, now that is absolutely legendary, and I definitely am gonna give Chris Paul the edge on that one. I give him a 9.8 out of 10, while I gave John Stockton a 7.2 out of 10. So yeah, I feel John Stockton really lost it when I looked deeper into both their stats, and I realized that Chris Paul had some insane, and I mean some insane stats, like insane accolades that really boosted his points in this category. But then again, this is only individual success, so we're gonna have to see how these guys carry over in the next category. So now we're moving on into the defensive category, and as you can see here, Chris Paul 2.3 steals per game in the regular season to John Stockton's 2.5, playoffs 2.1 to John Stockton's 1.9, and then Chris Paul 6-time steal champion and 9-time all defense, while John Stockton was 2-time steal champion and only 5 times all defense. I only say only 5 times, but that's only because Chris Paul was on the defensive team 9 times. That is insane for a player his size. I mean, you would expect at least someone to be 6'4", 6'5" to be racking up those all defensive teams. But man, Chris Paul, this guy's just putting up insane numbers, and these are per 36 stats. So now as you can see here, Chris Paul, during the regular season, he didn't have as many steals per game, but in the playoffs, he had more. And not only that, but he was a 6-time steal champion and was on the defensive team 9 times. Now, you might say, how is it possible that John Stockton had more steals per game, but did not have as many steal champions? Well, basically what happened here is that John Stockton did not play as many minutes as Chris Paul, which is why you get what you get here. But nevertheless, it is still very, very impressive by John Stockton, and I did take that into account. Remember, he is the all-time steals leader in the NBA, but at the same time, I took this into account as well. So, are we going to address that John Stockton did play in the hand-checking era, because many people make that case against LeBron James as, hey, he didn't play in the hand-check era. If he had, he would be clamped, he would be locked up. To all you LeBron fans, I know that's not true, calm down. But for John Stockton, he did play in the hand-checking era, so shouldn't he take a hit for that as well? I took that into consideration here because I gave John Stockton like a 9, but then I realized, wait a second, I have to take those defensive teams into consideration as well as the steal champions, because I can't just take that away from Chris Paul. And not only that, but John Stockton did play in the hand-checking era where it made him easier to defend and steal the ball. Now, I know you guys can get on me in the comments all you want, but that is how it is. That's how I put it, and I tried to be as subjective as I could, and honestly, this is what I got. Now, feel free to argue with me about John Stockton's defense in the comments down below, but I just like to say one thing. John Stockton, I'm giving him a 6.2, not because I feel like he is a terrible defender. It's just because that's just how good Chris Paul is at defending, and I couldn't give Chris Paul a 13. That would just break the entire grading system I have. So I had to drop down John Stockton's defense just because Chris Paul, he had so many all-defensive teams. He led the league in steals so many times. I just had to give him credit for that. I can't just completely ignore how many more times he led the league in steals or how many more defensive teams he was on. So as a result, John Stockton's grade had to be dropped just because he was compared to Chris Paul. And that's just really how grading works, all right? They're being graded relative to one another. So that's how it's always going to work when I do these, just to let you guys know. Probably should have said it in the beginning, but you know, that's on me. Now moving on, this is some people's favorite things, the offensive end. So basically, I'm just going to give you guys that stat sheet on both players per 36. This is regular season and playoffs. I'm not going to read it off. But Stockton's numbers were insane when it comes to assists. I mean, he averaged a double-double in the playoffs and the regular season. Chris Paul was close to averaging a double-double, but what I was really interested in is even though Chris Paul had more points per game, John Stockton had a better shooting percentage in everything except free throws. So you have to take that into consideration. However, in the playoffs, he did have a worse shooting percentage than Chris Paul in the playoffs. So as you can see here, Chris Paul, maybe he played better in the playoffs compared to John Stockton. I mean, regardless, neither of them accomplished much in the playoffs, let's be honest there. And I am going to address that later when it comes to team success. But right off the bat, you know, just looking at this, Chris Paul, he did pretty good. John Stockton, pretty good. These are pretty good stats for point guards, you know, high in assists. No one's scoring 30 points per game. And that's just, you know, that's how it is. Of course, no one's going to be doing that because it's point guards and they're both 6'1", 170. Chris Paul's 175. But yeah, just, you know, check out the stats. And what I like to also include in the offensive stats is how well they did in the clutch. So that's also a huge factor for me, and I'm going to be bringing up some stories, some stats, and here we go. Now, these stories were taken off Nobody Touches Jordan blog, so all these stats for Chris Paul were taken off of his website, so go check him out for insane NBA stats and stories. So funnily enough, Chris Paul has had a lot of choking moments in his career. It's actually pretty disgusting, so I'm not going to list them all and go in depth on all occasions because this video would be an hour long if I went in depth on every single Chris Paul choking incident in the playoffs. But I'm just going to name the times when it happened and you guys can go check that out for yourselves. 2008 Game 3 Western Conference Finals, Game 3 and Game 7, he choked in the fourth quarter. And that's a huge no-no. You know, choking in the fourth quarter is not cool. I mean, first 3 quarters, doesn't matter how bad you play, that's not clutch time. But when it comes to the fourth quarter, and this is how the NBA rates it, 5 minutes left to go, and it's a 5-point game, that's how they regulate whether or not it's a clutch moment. And most times in Game 3 and in Game 7, Chris Paul didn't even show up for those clutch games. That's in 2008, 2012. He averaged 13, 4, and 9 on 37% shooting and 4.5 turnovers. That was 2012 Western Conference semifinals, and he played 38 minutes per game. That was terrible for him. 2014 Western Conference semifinals. He has terrible games in the Western Conference semifinals. Like, disgusting. Like, seriously, this is career-ending, legacy-ruining, all right? This is the 3rd time he's choked in the Western Conference semifinals. 2014, Westbrook not only outplays him, but in Game 5, I think a lot of you guys remember this, Game 5, chance to go up 3-2 with the next game in LA. LA was up like 6 points with 18 seconds left. Chris Paul then turns it over, and not only that, but after turning it over and giving up a layup, he then fouls Westbrook on the 3-point attempt, and then on the very last possession of the game, you know, to give him hope, he turns the ball over, and that eventually ends the series. But then again, I will say this one thing to defend Chris Paul. There was a terrible call when Chris Paul fouled Russell Westbrook. So I am going to say that, I'm not going to completely attack him. I'm being subjective about the situation. But yeah, 2008, 2012, 2014, and then not only that, but 2015 Western Conference semifinals, Game 6 up 3-2 and a chance to go to the Western Conference Finals. Clippers are up 13 entering the fourth quarter, and then in the fourth quarter, Chris Paul goes 1 for 6 from the field. He has 0 assists, 0 steals, and at the very end of the game, he chucks up a garbage time 3, and that kind of pads his stats. And in the end, he did choke a 3-1 lead that series, and that was basically his last chance as a Clipper to go to the conference finals. He did have some positives though, alright? He was the 3rd most clutch regular season player in the 2019-2020 regular season. Chris Paul has a true shooting percentage of 67.8% in clutch situations. And remember, this is all 2019-2020. The Thunder are 29-13 in tight games, and honestly, I feel like those 3 stats that defend his legacy when it comes to his clutchness, I feel like that's pretty good, but at the same time, it comes at the later end of his career, and regardless of how good he plays this year in the regular season as a clutch player, his clutch playoff moments are going to always overshadow everything that he's ever done in his career up to this point, and unfortunately after this point, unless he wins a championship somehow with the Thunder, but I don't see that happening. And unfortunately, I had to drop the amount of points I'm going to give Chris Paul for his offense due to the fact that he's just not that clutch. Now in 2020 with the Thunder, he is definitely playing out of his mind in the late game situations, but unfortunately up to that point in the playoffs, he's just having a really bad time. But when it comes to John Stockton, he is number 6 on Bleacher Report's most clutch. Now I understand that Bleacher Report isn't the most reliable thing on the earth, but let me say this, one of the most insane playoff runs of all time in my opinion, it was the 1997 playoff run by John Stockton, where he played a total of 45 clutch minutes in the playoffs, and he shot 76.5% from the field and 57.1% from 3 in the 45 clutch minutes that he played during that 1997 playoff run. Alright, but not only that, if you remember, Game 6 Western Conference semifinals, 2.6 seconds remaining, he gets the ball off the inbound pass and drills the game-winning shot that would send the Jazz to the NBA Finals, eliminating the Houston Rockets, and eventually he would go up against Jordan and would lose. But, like, hey, it is what it is. I am going to take the fact that he never won into consideration when I talk about his clutchness. But like I said, that game-winning shot by John Stockton, it's all that anyone ever remembers. All right, when you think of John Stockton, you think of that shot and the fact that he's number 1 in steals in the NBA history. But, we're talking about the offense right now. Regardless of that fact, John Stockton is relatively known to be a clutch player. It's just that him and Chris Paul, even though John Stockton is known to be clutch and Chris Paul is known to be not very clutch, the fact that neither of them have won a championship really hurts. So as you can see here, I gave John Stockton an 8.6 and Chris Paul a 7.8. And if you guys are mad about this, I understand, but I had to take clutchness into the account, and I understand that Chris Paul averages more points per game, but John Stockton during the regular season does have more efficiency, and not only that, but John Stockton does have more assists per game. So yeah, that's what I had to take into consideration when talking about offense. And now moving on into the next category, team success. Oh man, hey, let's just say that none of these guys are flexing that much when it comes to team success. Chris Paul, the only time his team was successful was 2018. He played with James Harden, and the Rockets were number 1 in the NBA. Very nice, Chris Paul. But that's it. Like, that's it. Clippers were never number 1. Neither were the Hornets. All right, so you have to take that into consideration. And Chris Paul has never made it to the NBA Finals. He made it to the conference finals once and lost. Unfortunately, he was injured, and I have to, hey, my heart goes out to him. That was his only chance of making it to the NBA Finals. It is what it is. But hey, don't worry, Chris Paul. John Stockton ain't so hot either. 1997, 1998, he was the Western Conference champions both those years. And in 1997, he brought the Jazz to the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. And in 1998, he was tied for the best team record in the NBA. And honestly, neither are very impressive, at all. But hey, it is what it is. And this was the final grade I gave for each player when it came to team success. Yeah, Chris Paul got a 1. All right, come on. Like, if that's all you got, come on. And I didn't take into any weak, oh, he was number 1 in the division at this. I don't care about division. I care about conference, and I care about championships. If I didn't include conference championships, I feel like both of these guys would be taking huge hits. Nevertheless, they both did still. Chris Paul only got a 1 and John Stockton only a 5.5. Now moving on to the final category is how much help they had. Now this is all self-explanatory, all right? Chris Paul had David West for 2 years as a Hornet. He had Blake Griffin, who made 4 All-NBA teams from 2012 to 2015. That's pretty impressive if you ask me. DeAndre Jordan, 2017, well, he was a star. I'm not going to count him as a superstar. Definitely not. But James Harden, 2018-2019, was a superstar, all right? And if you guys get mad at me, Blake Griffin as a superstar, you guys are hating on Blake Griffin, all right? Maybe not as a defensive player, but as an offensive player, he was a superstar. Now, I understand he never won an MVP, but on the inside, as an offensive player, oh my, run that fast break, that was some insane moments, and that's why I labeled him as a superstar. Now, John Stockton, you know, Mark Eaton, two-time Defensive Player of the Year. In 1989, he was an All-Star. And from 1988 to 1999, he played with Karl Malone, who was a superstar throughout that entire time. He made All-NBA teams that entire time, that entire decade. All-NBA. Insane. Insane if you ask me. And that's basically why, at this rate, I'm just not going to be able to give John Stockton any multiplier when it comes to help. Because Karl Malone, I mean, the dude's like second all-time in scoring. Like, come on, man. And Karl Malone in 1997 was an MVP. 1999, MVP. And from 2000 to 2002, Karl Malone was an all-star as well. So I had to take all that into consideration for both players. So basically, John Stockton, he didn't get any multiplier. He just got, you know, 1. So he didn't get any multiplier at all. But Chris Paul, 1.15. Yay. I mean, hey, you know, it is what it is. That's what you're getting, man. I mean, you played with James Harden and Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin was no scrub. I mean, you know, I know that he's in Detroit now and everyone's hating him and, you know, they're kicking him while he's down. But hey, Blake Griffin, when he was a Clipper and he was still insanely athletic, my goodness, that man was something else, all right? Just trust me on that. That man was posterizing a poor soul every other night, and it was depressing. Just straight up depressing. And now finally, I have the final scores for each player. I've added up all the numbers, multiplied everything, and gave the little help bonus at the end. As you can see here, Chris Paul finished with a score of 254.8 to John Stockton 232.4. So yeah, that's basically it. Chris Paul does beat out John Stockton, and even though John Stockton did have more team success, it was minimal. Trust me when I say that. And then Chris Paul with those insane offensive accolades, #1 in so many categories, leading all point guards. But then not only that, but defensively, 6-time steal champion, 9 times all defense. My goodness. That man was putting on a clinic every single night. And then even though John Stockton, like I said, brought it back when it came to offense, as he was more clutch and he did have minimally more team success, it just wasn't enough in the end. And not only that, but Chris Paul, like, let's be honest here, I said Blake Griffin and James Harden are superstars, but they are not Karl Malone, bro. Like, I guess if Chris Paul played with James Harden his entire career, like John Stockton played with Malone, then I would be like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to give Chris Paul a multiplier either, but he did not play with a superstar for a straight decade, all right? I'd give it like half a decade. So that's why he got at least a little bit of a multiplier, 1.15, and again, that is what it is. I hope you guys all enjoyed this first NBA Battlegrounds. Leave suggestions for who I should do next, you know, who should go up against who. But yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed. This took an insane amount of time to put together the stats. I had to watch a bunch of footage regarding Stockton and Paul, and then I put down the entire grading system together. So I would appreciate it greatly if you guys left a like or subscribed, and I would love it even more if you guys debated with me on why you guys disagree or agree with me in the comments down below. This has been BHB. Thank you guys all for watching. Have a great day and goodbye.
I started with an A for right, and then I went and changed my life. I might take out the